that one. Transsexual, for example, means a person who undergoes some kind of change to their body in order to become their chosen gender. So, for example, it could be taking hormones, or it could be some kinds of surgeries. And it's usually a person on a one-way ticket going from, say, male to female or female to male. While, which would be my particular case. In Sophia's case, for example, I know that it's very much a two-way street. It's a back and forth ticket from male to female and back again.
Yeah, it costs a lot more for shopping.
What I really want to explore, and I think this is an issue that comes up sometimes, is what is the relationship or the perceived relationship between sex, gender and sexuality? And I know that's a very heavy question, but it's definitely one that comes up quite frequently around discussions and misperceptions around the trans experience. So what is the relationship between sex and gender, and then gender, sex, and age?
The number one question that I get is, are you sexually attracted to men? Because I live 70% of my life as a man and 30% of my life as a woman. So when I meet people and they learn that I am transgender and I'm cross-gender, they ask me, so what about your sexual orientation? And it doesn't have anything to do about my sexual orientation. It is about my identity and the expression of my gender. So for me, it's like telepost and bananas. It doesn't have any relation at all, you know. I don't know about you, all of you.
Well, I mean,
But I guess I do know, but
sexuality is very different from anything that's trans. I mean, there's FTAMs, so females to males, that I know that were, you know, they biologically grew up female, and then as they were going through their stages of transition, either continued sleeping with women or even started sleeping with men. I mean, sexuality and who you are as a person is not anything to do with trans at all. I don't know if
Well, if I could just put in my 2 cents on that one, I would say that there is a lot of public ignorance, lack of knowledge in terms of, you know, and confusion regarding sexual orientation on the one hand and gender identity on the other. Simply put, both are two very different things, two very different streams. What your sexual orientation is completely different from what your gender identity is. I think I heard one person say recently that sexual orientation is who you go to bed with, and gender identity is who do you go to bed as.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
That's a great way of doing it, actually.
that's an Amanda Ryan line.
I'm particularly fond of the gingerbread person as a tool for. Are you familiar with the gingerbread person?
the genderbread.
The genderbread person, which really kind of defines sexuality on the spectrum between heterosexual and homosexual, and then there's romanticism and eroticism. But that's a completely different show that we're not going to. Sadly, we don't have time to get into. I want to do a bit more of the trans myth busting, though. I think that there's definitely a lot of misperceptions out there.
The number one perception that we get, especially with 279, is sexual predators. You know, you get somebody like Senator Platt that comes out and says that pretty much, not necessarily that person says that, but he approaches what they call the bathroom bill and says that we will go as some of us, it will give the opportunity for men to dress as women and rape little girls in the washrooms.
That's,
you know? So it's pretty much, a lot of people take throughout the ignorance of society sometimes, will take either homosexuality or gender identity, gender expression, and attached to that, how do you call that word there? Some pedophilia, you know, which is, again, you know, pedophilia. And to that person I answer, you know, like hockey teams, or, you know, a pedophile will insert into anything. They are looking for prey. So they will become somebody of importance, like maybe a policeman or a priest or somebody that runs the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. But like I would say that the scare tactics, they try to intrude into the fact that because we are a minority and we are not like the rest of the people, that we are like sexually dysfunctional. And this is a myth that we need to break, we need to destroy, because it is basically, that's why we have so much of a high rate of suicide attempts, because of all this discrimination throughout ignorance.
And that is an urban myth that has been very much refuted in numerous studies. There is no correlation between like disproportionate correlation between pedophiles and trans individuals. I think what you were referring to was Senator Platt, who raised a concern about voyeurism in the public washroom and public spaces. Yes. And we'll be getting into that a little bit further down. And it's definitely something that has raised a lot of concern. I think the Ontario Civil Liberties Association, in their witness statement to the Senate, pointed out that they had not seen any increase in voyeurism as a correlation with increase in trans rights. So there is almost nothing to support that kind of urban myth. What other urban myths are you aware of?
There are actually so many, it's difficult to know where to start, but one of them is that being transgender is a choice. And in fact, nobody wants to be transgender, nobody wants this in their lives. It's just it's just who they are. But it's, it's certainly not a choice.
Yes.
For example, I stutter. And I did not choose to stutter. It's just a condition I was born with, and so to say that I have a trans lifestyle would be as much nonsensical as to say that I have a stuttering lifestyle. No one chooses this, so. That's one of the great myths, I think, that it's a choice. Yes. When actually
we do get the phrase that I respect your choice. You just go like, wait a second, it's not a choice. The only choice that you have is to embrace it and to live it and to understand who you are and respect that.
We mentioned earlier some of the urban myths that have come up around the conversations of Bill C-279 and all of those dialogues. But Canada has a very rich, long history of fighting against, essentially a long history of busting these trans myths. And now, Dan, you've helped put together a book really highlighting some of the trans history of activism in Canada. Just how rich is that history?
It's really rich. I mean, our book, and it's fortunate in its limitations, is that it's the tip of the iceberg. And hopefully that the book will facilitate more people talking about more history. I mean, it's really difficult when, for so many years, it was excruciatingly hard to be trans and to be visible as somebody who was non-normatively gendered. That we really don't know how much activism has actually occurred, but from what, I mean, in terms of the contributions to the book, the authors of the book, I mean, they come from all across Canada. They're in every single class, every single echelon of society doing amazing things.
I think it really demonstrates the diversity that exists within the trans experience, where it is not unique to any particular class or economic or anything like that. Something I wanted to mention as well is that very often our understanding of trans is quite Western culturally specific. I think I like how you touched on that in the earlier segment when we kind of explained the difference between two-spirited and not two-spirited. I wanted to bring that up because there are other cultures elsewhere in the world where trans isn't really recognized in the same way. It's not the way that it's the way that those populations understand it. Do you find that there are other understandings of trans that come in from abroad or outside of Canada?
don't we have a demographic in Thailand that reaches out to our
yes,
group as well?
when Bill C-279 was out, there was a friend of mine in Thailand that met some trans people in a bar. And when they heard that she knew of gender mosaic, they told that girlfriend of mine to say thank you to the activism in Canada for Bill C-279 because it was pretty much helping them in Thailand to make things go faster. So imagine, like Canada, we are, in a sense, sometime the new light for the whole planet on some points. And but at the same time, you discuss chatting with people that are trans in other countries. And we looked at our website, and we had visitors from Russia and China and everywhere. And we're talking close to 1 million visitors total. And it was incredible to see when we exchanged with them, the mentality is not necessarily the same. The problems are not necessarily always at the same level. But it's definitely the number one thing that sticks out to everybody around is the difficulty of education and what causes all this discrimination and all the statistics that you come out that are like scary, and to different levels in different countries. We are not necessarily all the same, but very diversified. The one thing that I find important for us in Activism Canada is that we are, within our community, a lot of discrimination within our community, and this needs to stop. If we want the rest of society to understand, our community needs to show that out, that we are united.
And we'll be getting into that in a segment a little later on. After the break, we are looking at some of the medical elements of the trans experience, because of course it is something that's very much pathologized and shrouded in that kind of medical lens, and perhaps we can kind of work through that a little bit and get a much better understanding. This is a conversation on trans and trans rights on Let's Talk CanQueer, and we'll be back just after the break. Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk CanQueer, the show that brings you the biggest issues facing gender and sexual minorities living in Canada. And this is we're doing trans rights. I completely got ahead of myself there. And this is such a huge issue that even during the break we were all abuzz with other possible questions that have come to the fore. Before we get into the pathology of trans and sex reassignment surgery and that very big topic, the question of the refugee experience or the refugee trans experience and people of colour trans experience has come up as an even more diverse element in this kind of mosaic of the trans experience. Are you able to touch on that at all?
Well, in terms of like immigrant issues and refugee issues, there's another layer of governance on it, right? So when I'm doing a study on underemployment and unemployment amongst trans populations, and those who are recently immigrated to Canada often have another element of fear in terms of being trans or living out as trans, because they fear deportation, they fear that if their status is precarious as a citizen, that they're not going to get their proper papers. But also during the break I was saying that for many trans populations of color, there's the added racism that goes on it. So it's not, for example, if a white F to M transitions, it's often a celebratory thing, and we can strut around and be proud of our masculinity. But if a black F to M doesn't have the same experience, because what does it mean to be a black male in Canadian society? And I find that we still, in terms of the